According to my device here, I've got sound. I just want to say hello and welcome. My name is Angela Fehr, and this is the first of what's hopefully going to be a series of many weekly live lessons here on Mondays in my studio. And still saying no sound. Oh, I'm on. Okay, good. I'm glad you're hearing me. We're going to get all the kinks ironed out, and this is going to be just a really wonderful and successful thing if I can do this correctly. And there's my telephone. There, that's going to voicemail. Okay, that's the problem with live lessons is you can have interruptions as well. So hopefully no one's knocking on the door trying to sell me anything, and hopefully I don't get any other phone calls. This call actually is my internet provider letting me know that I have enough bandwidth to actually stream today, because it's just rural internet has its own issues. Anyhow, we're gonna get right to work on a Monday. I love Mondays, and I think I chose Mondays for my live lessons because Mondays for me, it's my favorite day of the week because it's a fresh day. You have a new to-do list. You've got energy, hopefully, from having a great restful weekend, and or even just that idea of, you know what, I'm going to do this week better than I did last week. So that's one reason I love Mondays, and I thought Mondays would be a great time to do this weekly lesson. Start the week off right. It gets me painting and teaching a little bit, and as I launch into my week. And this week I don't think I'll be doing much painting because I'm preparing for an open studio event on Friday. So that most of my week will be preparing for that. And so we're gonna just quickly move the camera over to my work surface and hope I can get that set up nice and straight. I just have one camera, so you're gonna have to bear with me for a moment while I move the camera over, and then we'll go from there. So just hang on a sec, and we'll get it moved over. Okay, well, it's mostly working. I should be just there we go. I have a very tricky tripod. I have to balance it just right so that you guys can see. There we go. So now, are you guys set up? Can you see my work surface? I've got a couple things here I want to show you. One thing is I have a nice little list here. Whenever I mention a product, hopefully I'll remember to write it down. I also have, I'm going to move my mic so you can hear me better. I also have my brand new 2017 watercolor calendar. This is the proof I received, and I've actually changed a couple photo paintings in it since I received this proof. But my new watercolor calendar is available, and I'll throw a link to that in the description. I'm very excited about it because every year I become a better painter, and my calendars then get even better. So I'm excited to be able to show you just a peek. This is one of my favorite new paintings. And then I've just alternated abstracts, landscapes, and florals throughout the calendar. So I'm excited about getting that out and launching that. It'll be available at my open studio as well as online. Now we're going to move right over to talk about palettes today, because I really want to address a lot of the questions that I'm asked in emails, on YouTube, and so forth. And a lot of that is, I think sometimes we have this feeling as artists or as beginning painters that there's little secrets that we don't know, and there are things that are so natural to professional artists that they're not even remembering to mention them. And that's kind of true. I think what happens is actually most of us artists, we work alone in our studios, we find ways to do things, and we don't always know if they're the traditional way or the technical way or the professional way, but they're ways that work for us. And so often with the things we don't mention, we just don't mention them because they're kind of hacks that we've figured out over time. I'm just trying to flatten this piece of paper so we can paint on it in a bit. You know, we've figured them out over time, but we don't really know that it's the traditional way. We might feel like we're kind of just making things up as we go along. And so we don't always talk about some of our techniques. Anyhow, moving on to palettes. One thing I get asked about all the time is about my palette, where I got it and what I put in it and how I use it. And this palette here is the very palette I had when I took my first watercolor class way back in 1994. I was 17 years old. And I bought this palette just at a local hobby shop, so it wasn't like I went out and researched what the best palette to use was. And so it's just a cheap plastic palette, and one reason I picked it was because it has lots of space in there for different colors. And I've continued to use it over the years. The palette, it's a piece of plastic, it doesn't really wear out. And some of the colors are actually positioned in exactly the same place I put them when I was 17 years old. And when I was 17 and learning to paint, I kind of filled my palette. Yeah, I didn't know what I was doing when I put the colors in my palette, so I just kind of chose to keep the yellow over in this part, and the blues kind of go over here, and the reds kind of over in this section. Greens are here, and so forth. So I kind of tried to put them in color families, and that was really the extent of my research into positioning colors in your palette. And as a color would run out, I would fill it up again, so the colors never moved out of the original places they were put in. And then sometimes I'd find a color that I didn't use much, and then I would replace it. So here I have a green way over on this side because, you know, I used up a yellow that I didn't really care for, and so I threw a green in there. And there's a blue over here just because there wasn't space over in this blue section. So it just kind of has evolved over time. And while I do like keeping my yellows separate from the darker colors, that's one thing I would stress. As you get to know your palette, you're going to know where those colors are, and so it becomes very natural. Whatever placement you put your colors in becomes very natural to you. So there's not really a wrong way to do it, in my opinion. I have actually two other palettes here. This palette I filled using Core brand paints, and this is Core Modern Watercolor, and they're made by Golden, and that's a fairly new line, and they had sent me colors to try out and sample and review, and so I filled up one palette just with those colors from Core. And you can see I still have the yellow over in this corner, but I've kind of rearranged the colors a little bit from there. I went yellow, orange, red, blue, green, and there's a violet over here as well. And so, you know, there's not really a wrong way to do it. When I'm looking for a particular brand of paint, I know this is my palette with Core paint in it. And then finally, I have this palette, which is my newest one. You can see it's not full yet. And I had decided that really I needed to learn a little bit about earth tones. So I ordered a bunch of new paints in different earth colors. And so I threw them into this palette. And it's kind of handy having my earth tones in one palette because, you know, I can just reach straight for it and know I'm going to have an earth tone that will probably suit my needs. I'm a little bit tempted to go color families, individual palettes for each individual color family. I kind of think now that I have so many different colors of paint that it would be cool to have one palette all of reds, one of all of yellows, one all of blues. But the drawback to that, I think, would be that you'd have to travel then with 5 or 6 different palettes. And, you know, it would be great for working in the studio to have all my colors right at my fingertips and spread out across my table, but I don't think it would be practical for any other time, you know, if I'm out in the field or even demonstrating in a lesson to you guys. I need then a kind of a multi-purpose palette with my most frequently used colors in it. When you are looking for a palette, look for one that gives you some mixing areas. You don't have to use this brand of palette, although one thing I like about it is that it is inexpensive, and I do have a link to it in the description of the video here. But you know, you don't have to use this palette. I would say choose one that gives you some mixing areas. I like divided areas because you're not going to have all your different colors run together, and then I can reuse these colors. I don't clean it. I don't clean my palette because I know that I'm going to be wanting to, I can use this orange in another painting. I don't want to waste my color by just cleaning it out every time I've finished painting. I can use those color mixes and kind of recycle them and upcycle them. And after a while, you'll start to, well, I'm not sure if any of them are like that. After a while, your palette colors will start to get all kind of a murky grayish color. And that's when you know that it's probably time to clean it out and just give it a nice wipe. And I like to just do that with a piece of paper towel. And take out that gray color. But you really get some fabulous neutrals when you've been mixing color in your palette for a long time. You get some very useful colors in that kind of neutral range. So don't be too quick to clean your palette. Now, some of this material I have covered in my other classes and in my other videos. So if some of it seems repetitive to you, keep in mind that I have new students joining my videos and my classes all the time. So it might be new for you, might be old stuff for you, but not necessarily for everyone who's watching today. I do talk about palettes and cover a lot of this information in my basic techniques course on my website at learn.angelafehr.com. Changing gears a little bit, we've talked about how to position colors in your palette. And great, I'm just checking the comments to see where you guys are at and make sure I'm still working, everything's working technically here. If you are having video trouble, do try refreshing. Like Gail has mentioned, that's often if it's working for everyone else, that's the best thing to do. Restart your page. One reason I squeeze my palettes into my paints into my palette, I use them dry, and one reason I do that is to avoid wasting, and I'm going to show you that right now. I'm going to use this tube of color. This is my Mary Blue paint brand that I've had for probably well over a decade, and you can see the color's still nice and gooey in the tube, so paint can last a really long time. And when I was first starting to paint and I used to try out different brands and I didn't know what to buy, I would buy watercolor magazines, and they would often give special deals for if you would, send in the ad or whatever. This is before the internet really took off. And so you could send in a little clip and they would send you a sample of their paint. And so that was how I got some different brands and different brushes to try. But one thing I've noticed is I love the beautiful rich color you get straight from the tube. It's always very vibrant, and that's wonderful. But the problem is it's very easy to take more than you need just on the tip of your brush, and then do your little bit of painting. Whoops, clumsy. Do your painting, and of course, and then also it's very easy to use the paint kind of pasty like that, and with watercolor you want to use it in more of a liquid form. So then I have to use some water to spread it out and get that gluey consistency down. And then often you'll get just more than you need, and where does it go? It goes into your water container and gets washed away forever. So one of the main reasons I use my paint squeezed into my palette and allowed to dry is just to prevent that kind of waste. And you guys are the same as me. You don't want to waste product, and that's why so many of you tell me you just can't afford the really great brand of watercolor paper. The brands we artists like to recommend is, it's so expensive. So let's try to keep our costs down in our paint so we can maybe afford some of the better papers. So instead of just having that very moist amount of paint, which then I would like to, I could easily rinse away in my water container, or then find out I didn't use all of it. Here's some pink squeezed into my palette that I haven't used the whole amount. So now it's sitting there in my palette waiting to be used and kind of taking up space. And so it ends up drying there anyhow. So I really do think that it's the best way to be more economical with your paint. However, some paints sit in the palette just a lot nicer than others. And I find with paint that gets a lot of use, it's going to keep its nice consistency. It's going to stay kind of, it's going to stay firm in your palette, but not hard and crumbly. And this one is fairly new in my palette, fairly fresh, and you can easily pick up some nice moist color with just a damp brush. Although I like to spritz my palette with water before I start painting, just to activate the paint on the surface of each well. And some paints, over time, especially ones you don't use a lot, they get really dry and crumbly. And you can see over here I've got some that's kind of crumbly particles. And it tends to happen either if you don't use the color much, I have paint on my hand now, or towards the end of the life of that amount that you squeezed into your palette. So here I'm almost out of this orange, and the little bits of orange that are left are pretty dry and grainy. You can still use it. It takes a little more time to just kind of stroke that paint and get it nice, because those little grains and granules, as it dries and gets kind of parched like that, they're going to be kind of granular on your paper as well, which can actually create some nice textures. But if you're looking for a smooth wash, you don't want to be working with pigment that's really parched and dried like that. So I recommend, there's a couple things you can do to try to prevent it. One is just to work with maybe a little bit smaller amount in your palette. I like to fill my wells right up, but if you're a person who's not painting super frequently, you might want to decrease the amount of paint you put into your palette so it doesn't get that kind of ancient crumbly texture. Certain brands dry out faster than others. I love using paint by Daniel Smith because it seems like it just keeps that kind of firm, like a very firm jelly almost consistency, like a gumdrop or something. Excuse me. And so I like using paint by Daniel Smith for that reason. I found the Winsor & Newton ones do tend to get a little bit more crumbly faster, I think. And then there are some brands, I'm trying to remember what they're called, that M. Graham actually is one. And I think the Miele paints, they are also the same, where they use honey as a binder, and paint that uses honey as a binder tends to not dry out as quickly either. Although I haven't worked with the honey-bound paints much, so I really can't speak for that personally. However, if you're in a humid country, you might find that the paints that keep that moisture consistency have a tendency to mold, and so you'll want to watch out for that. And again, some of the strategies that I use for, excuse me, there's that live drawbacks of being live again. Some of the strategies I use for working with my paints are because I live in a dry climate. I don't have to worry about my paints molding. So then, you know, you do have to change your working methods. One thing I can recommend that you do with your palette, if you find that you're not painting real frequently and you want to avoid that parched effect with your paint, is put it in a Ziploc bag after it's had a chance to dry on the surface. So after a painting session, you're going to have puddly paint. You don't want to put seal your paint up or your palette up right away after that, but you could wait an hour or two till it's gotten that firm consistency back and the main amount of moisture is gone, and then throw your palette in a Ziploc bag. I buy extra large Ziploc bags for that. Or you can use, especially if you're traveling and you don't want the moist colors to flow into each other, you can use Glad Press and Seal wrap, which actually you can press right against your palette and it'll form a little bond around each individual paint well, which I love being able to do that when I'm plein air painting and have to travel with a wet palette. So those are some great techniques for keeping your paint from smudging, since these palettes that I'm using don't come with lids. Okay, I've got some, you guys, I love your comments. I wish I had time to read them and not just be the one talking here, but I'm going to just keep moving. Yeah, great comments, everybody. And if I really, one thing I'm not talking about, and which I appreciate a bird with a brush bringing up, is that you can buy pans of watercolor paint where the paint has already been put into little wells for you to use. And the pans are formulated differently. Some of them are formulated to just last longer rather than using paint straight from the tube. So you can keep that in mind. I'm just going to quickly look at my notes because I did make a list of things I wanted to cover. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about color choices, just a little bit, because I get a lot of emails of people asking me what colors I use in my palette. And here's what I like to tell them. I like to use a cool red, which is more of a pink usually, and a warm red. And this one's kind of dirty and murky. I've got a bunch of old paint in this particular palette that needs to be reconstituted, but kind of an orangey red, like a cadmium red. So then I have two reds, they're primary colors. So I like to have one that's kind of pinkish, bluish based, makes a nice purple, one that has some orange in it, and that makes a nice orange or green, or yellow, or not yellow, it doesn't make yellow, but it mixes well with yellow. I like to have a nice primary blue, that's a cobalt blue. Although I really also love phthalo turquoise, which is more of that electric blue. And then, so you have and that's more of a cool blue, this is more of a true blue, I guess. I like to have a violet in my palette just because I see violet everywhere. So this is a dioxazine violet or Windsor violet. And then I like to have yellow, of course, and this one is New Gamboge, which is like an orangey school bus yellow, as you can see. So that's a warm yellow. It's got a lot of orange in it. And then for my other yellow, I like kind of an earthier yellow. And some people say use a warm and a cool yellow, but I'd like to use those two guys. So that's a raw sienna. Although the lemon yellow, if you're looking for a cool yellow, like a lemon yellow will work really well for that. And it's so cool, it almost looks greenish. So those are just a range of colors that you can have in your palette if you're getting started and you're not sure where to go. A warm and a cool red, a nice true blue, or you could try to find a warm and a cool blue as well. But this kind of, to me, I like having the cobalt for sure. The phthalo is kind of optional. Violet's kind of optional because you can make violet by mixing your red and your blue. And then having a warm and a cool yellow, or an earthy yellow, and then a really brilliant yellow is another way to think of it. And so from those you can mix pretty much all the other colors you'll need. And if you're working with basic colors like this, it really helps you to get to know your colors. And I've found that almost every time I start adding new colors to my palette, I have to add them slowly, because if I add in new colors too quickly, I'm not going to use them because I don't know what they do. So having colors where you're confident, you know, hey, I can make a really great, well, I'll show you, one of my favorite mixtures is mixing phthalo turquoise with a little of the violet, because it gives this wonderful rich blue, stormy blue. So that's one of my favorite mixes. It's a go-to color that I know I can do, and I use it consistently. Another one that I enjoy is burnt umber and cobalt blue, because it makes such a beautiful gray, and it can make a blue gray, or you can increase the burnt umber and get kind of a browner tone. For some reason it's kind of wanting to get reddish today. That's a new brand of cobalt I'm trying out, the Shinhan cobalt, Shinhan watercolor, which is this guy here, and trying out their cobalt blue and seeing how it compares to the Daniel Smith that I have been using. So when you have those go-to colors, when you have a palette full of just a few colors that you're really confident you know how to use, it makes it a lot easier to introduce a new color, you know, say this serpentine green, and then start experimenting and seeing how it mixes with, you know, your raw sienna, seeing how it mixes with your phthalo turquoise, and just seeing the different effects you get. And so you're a lot more likely to experiment if you just have one new color to try. So if you're adding new colors, add them really slowly and get to know them really well. I have a question. Do I find the tubes are better than the pans? I don't know. I haven't really used pan paints at all because I started out with tube paints. That was what it was available in my area. Aside from the pans that are marketed to children, which we know we're not even going to go there. They tend to have really chalky consistency. So yeah, I just couldn't tell you. Okay, more palette hacks. You'll notice when I'm working with my palette, sometimes I'm going to want to be mixing a color. I'll grab the phthalo turquoise because it's nice and dynamic. And I'm going to be mixing this color, and I want to make a green, so I'm going to reach right into my yellow with my phthalo turquoise brush, and I've made a lovely green, but in the meantime, I've also dirtied up my paint in my palette. So people see that and they tend to panic. Excuse me. And they tend to panic and they think, what are you going to do? You've made your palette all dirty. And that yellow is just, you can't use it anymore. Well, the one nice thing about using your paint dry in your palette is that any contamination that goes onto it is going to just happen on the surface of that paint. What's underneath isn't being affected by what's on top. So I can take a clean damp brush and use it like a sponge to just lift out any dirty paint that's on top. And right underneath is waiting that nice pure yellow. Now the exception to that is when you've had a color in your palette for a couple of years and it's, you know, gotten crunchy and weird. It's a lot, you know, it's a lot harder to get that clean. And this one really, I should just, it's on my list of things to do, is go in with, usually I just take a sharp knife and scrape out any dried paint that's gotten really too parched to use. And, you know, this just isn't nice anymore. So it's time to move that on out. And I'll probably replace this with a completely different color that I use more often, because the reason this is dried out to that extent is because I just don't use it. So time to go put something else there. A little trick I have for keeping colors organized in my palette, because I do have 5 or 6 palettes in my studio, is that I like to write the name of the color. And that one just wiped right off, so I must have used the wrong pen. But I like to just wipe the edge of my palette down so it's clean. And then I can write in the name of the color that I just added there. So you can just barely see, this one says New Gamboge. And then I write it in with a permanent pen, pigment marker, a permanent marker, so that I have an idea of what color is in there. And then when I remove that color, if I'm replacing with something completely different, I can just scrape that word right off with a little knife, or use a magic eraser and write in the new color names. So easy to do, and helps you keep track, because you think you'll remember what color you put in, and you almost never do. I don't know why, but it's just that way, unless you're just adding one color at a time. I'm just looking at the comments again, and Bev has asked about honey-bound paint. Does it attract bugs? I am told that it can. So yeah, if you're out painting on plein air, you might want to watch out for that. I haven't experienced it myself. I find that anytime I'm painting outdoors, I attract bugs anyhow, because you know, it's just so easy to be distracted when you're painting outdoors, and they just add to that. So it's kind of a Murphy's Law thing. More questions about, just trying to think here if I have anything else I wanted to cover in my palette overview. One thing I want to say, guys, is that I'm sharing stuff that's worked for me, but again, it's really not a hard and fast rule. One reason as artists we tend to be a little hesitant to share all our tips is sometimes I don't want anybody thinking this is Angela's law, and I don't even want to think that myself, because there's a little part of me that's looking at different palettes and thinking maybe I should try something different. Jean Haynes uses a beautiful round palette with just one well in the middle for mixing colors. Maybe I should try something like that. I'm very intrigued by porcelain palettes and enamel ones, and trying different Maybe I should just use a great big cookie sheet. I want to try different things because, you know, just because I've used this palette for 17 or 22 years does not mean that it's the only way to go. So, you know, just because I'm doing things a certain way doesn't mean that I might not change it in future, and doesn't mean that I think everybody should. It works for me. One thing I do like to tell you, I like to tell you guys about all this because I think it demonstrates that there's not really a system for painting. You know, there's not really a perfect way to put your colors in your palette. Some artists swear by using a color wheel style palette and putting your color in order of the color wheel, and I can see the benefits of that, but there's no law that says you have to do it that way. And whatever method you use, you can train yourself to use it effectively. The palettes I'm using, I do have a link to my supplies that I'm using today in my description of this video, so take a look at that when you get a chance. And we're just going to wrap this little lesson up because we're actually past our half hour now with a little demonstration because I haven't gotten to do much painting yet today. So I'm just going to grab a little paint from my palette. This is Opera Pink, and paint maybe a happy little flower. And see where we go with that. I love painting my flowers from the center first, so there we go. A little bit of pink. We're going to grab that yellow that I just cleaned so nicely and maybe dot a little bit of that in. And I think next week I'll try to get my camera zoomed in a little bit closer so that you guys can see when I paint. I wish it does not have an easy way to zoom it while I'm recording, so I'm gonna have to work on just better methods so I can do this on a regular basis. But that's really pretty, isn't it? I love the combination of the Opera Pink with yellow, and almost any yellow looks beautiful with Opera Pink. I'm leaving my center open. I can decide after this has started to dry whether I want to add a dark center or a lighter center. And then I'm going to add some green for leaves or foliage. And as I'm painting this leaf shape, I'm trying to decide if I want a nice smooth rounded leaf or a kind of spiky one. I'm imagining this flower, so it can be whatever I want it to be. And one thing about loose painting is you can kind of do that. I don't usually have people coming to me and saying, you know, your flower is not anatomically correct or whatever, botanically correct, because what people respond to is the liveliness of loose painting and the freshness that you get from it. So it's about giving an impression of a painting, of a flower, rather than exact details. And I'm painting a whole bunch of leaves here because I'm having fun with it. This is a Serpentine Genuine from Daniel Smith, this green, and it's kind of nice because it's similar to Daniel Smith's green gold, but it's a little bit murkier. And a little phthalo turquoise in there to add interest. And there we go. And then I like to tilt sometimes and just let that color flow a little bit, have a little bit of movement. The paper I'm using today, which I actually didn't link up, I'll do that after we finish up, is Indigo art paper. It's watercolor paper by Indigo, and it's a handmade paper from India, and I love the way the paint settles into the little dimples in the paper and just creates some beautiful texture. And that's something I think is a combination of paint by Daniel Smith, which has some beautiful sedimentary qualities, a lot of the colors that I pick. And we'll talk about that in a future lesson. I'm so excited that we can do this every week and I can cover stuff that I missed today in a future lesson, and I have time to do it. I don't have to tell you everything I know today. I do talk a lot about I'm not really going over the techniques I'm using right now. You notice I'm starting with dry paper and just adding color and letting it flow. but I do cover all of this in my online classes. And if you're just getting started, and if a lot of what I shared today was new to you, I would encourage you to check out my beginner courses, Basic Techniques, Loose and Fluid 1, and use those as your introduction to loose and fluid watercolor painting. I'm going to let this dry. I'll go back a little later and probably enhance the shape of the flower a bit more and create a vibrant center. But it's just a fun little warm-up, a little bit of color play using some of the colors that interested me as I showed you my palette today. Feel free to leave questions in the comments area, and I'm looking forward to being back next week with another lesson based on probably whatever's interesting me in my watercolor journey to share with you. I'm just taking a look at your comments one last time, and I'm actually going to move the camera, I think, so we can look at each other while we... Okay, so just taking a look at your comments here. I didn't share a lot of demonstration of watercolor techniques today, saving that for my next class. Excited to be able to do these half-hour lessons with you. I really welcome your comments and questions because they help me to know what you're looking for in watercolor instruction, and it does help me to direct you to the best content if I've already made a video or a class about it. J. Robert Darrell says, if as a watercolorist we're not allowed to use white or black paint, why do manufacturers keep making them and including them in palettes? I feel exactly the same way, and I actually talk about this in my Basic Techniques course. I feel a little ripped off that if I want to buy a watercolor set, it comes with white and black, which I'm not going to use. I'm a watercolor traditionalist, and what I mean by that is I love the beauty of transparent watercolor. And I really do avoid using white and black because I feel like they take away from the beauty and transparency of watercolor. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it. There are artists who use white and black. If you're using it to enhance your painting and make your painting better and more beautiful, I say go for it. If you're using it as a crutch to kind of control and fix your painting as you go, that's, I don't know how to put this. You're going to need it less as you get better at watercolor. That's the best way to say it. The beauty of watercolor to me is the transparency, layering color and getting those beautiful glows of effects. And we do that by sticking to the transparent colors. And black being it's such a dead color, it sucks all the life out of your painting. So they're just not pretty to use a lot of the time in watercolor. And so, yeah, I don't know why they keep putting them in palettes. I think sometimes the manufacturers just don't paint themselves, so they don't really know what's necessary or what watercolorists prefer. And that's why I really like buying my paint by the tube and setting up my own set of colors rather than buying a set. Oh, Susan's asked a question, how do you get to where you can paint full-time as a living? That is a great question. If you and it's I can just tell you that I feel so fortunate to be able to do this as my job, and it looks different than I thought it would when I dreamed of being an artist and having this as my career. I thought that it would mean being in my studio full-time, painting, churning out beautiful paintings and getting really great at painting and having stuff in galleries and going to art shows. And it's not all like that. I had to learn how to do a lot of things. I'm very and the bulk of my income as an artist comes from teaching, so it's not as pure, I guess, as just painting and then all the money comes pouring in. I wish it was that way, but it's not. It's you do what you do for the love of it, and I know they always say do what you love and the money will follow, and I don't necessarily agree that that's a truth. But I think if you find your passion and find what you love, you will be able to find some fulfillment and satisfaction in that, whether you're doing it as a career or just as something that kind of feeds your soul on a regular basis. And I really have to constantly remind myself because I'm an artist, because being an artist is my career, I have to remind myself that just because I do get to make money at this doesn't mean that's where my drive should come from. I have to continually connect with painting from my heart and teaching as a part of having a fulfilled life and not as a way of making money, if that makes sense. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. I have another question. Can you share how to mount watercolor in a more contemporary way without putting it under glass? That is on my list of things to do, because that's something I've been doing with my paintings. They're not all matted and framed under glass anymore, and I'd love to share how I do that in a future lesson. So yes, that's on my list. And yeah, just great comments, everybody. I love seeing you guys share information with each other, and I think that's a great thing that gets us all together to be a watercolor community. It's not just me sharing what I know, but you guys get to share it too, and that's one thing I like about the way YouTube has these live sessions set up. We are done for today. I'm already well over time. I had a great time talking to you today. I will send out a link to the video for those who didn't make it, and this video will be up for a week until next Monday's session. So if you didn't catch it today, you'll be able to watch it or re-watch it as you need to. And if you have great tips for using your palette, I'd love to hear them. Send me an email. My email address is ange@angelafehr.com. And check out all my content at learn.angelafehr.com. I've got lots of watercolor information there, more than you can use in a year probably, and lots of more information on angelafehr.com as well. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you for joining me, and yeah, we'll be back next week.